The moment my mom hissed, "You're just like your father," something inside me cracked, because they knew exactly what that meant, and they still said it. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Lane. I'm in my early 20s, raised by my mom, Rexha, and my stepdad, Klain. My real dad, Jord, left when I was 6 after a huge fight. I grew up thinking he was unstable and dangerous, and I tried my whole life to avoid being anything like him. My parents used that fear to control me. They picked my major, my job, even my curfew. Anytime I questioned them, they'd say I was getting emotional like Jord. Everything changed when I got accepted into an apprenticeship in another state. I told them I wanted to go. They immediately said no. When I calmly told them I was going anyway, Rexha snapped and said those words that cut deeper than anything. I later learned the truth from my Aunt Keel. My father didn't just leave. He walked away after finding out my mom was having an affair with Klain. He wrote me letters for years, but my mom hid them. When I heard that, something in me shifted. I realized my parents weren't protecting me. They were trapping me. With Keel's help, I packed my things and left. Rexha tried to block the door and shout me down, but I kept walking. I moved in with Keel and started my new life. My father had passed away, but I finally read his letters. They were full of love, regret, and hope. For the first time, I felt free. And if being free makes me like him, then I'm proud of it. Rexha and Klain always acted like every part of my life belonged to them. They chose what I studied, where I worked, and how late I could stay out, even though I was old enough to decide for myself. They didn't ask what I wanted. They simply handed me plans and expected me to follow them without questions. If I hesitated even for a moment, they'd give each other a look and say the same line they always used, "We know what's best, you get emotional like your father." Hearing that made my stomach twist, but I never argued. I learned early that pushing back only led to long lectures, raised voices, and days of cold silence. So I stayed quiet and pretended their choices were my own. I went to the college they picked, took the job they approved, and came home exactly when they told me to. Inside, I felt trapped, but I didn't show it. I convinced myself it was easier this way, easier to let them steer everything instead of risking another reminder of the person they insisted I was becoming. Every decision they made for me felt like another door closing, yet I kept my head down and followed the path they built. There were moments when I wanted to speak up, to tell them I wasn't a child and I didn't need their constant control. But the fear of hearing my father's name used against me again kept me quiet. They used that fear like a leash, gently tugging whenever I drifted too close to independence. So, day after day, I moved through a life that didn't feel like mine. I waited, hoping things would change on their own, never imagining how quickly everything would unravel. When the acceptance message arrived, I stared at it for a long time before I could breathe again. It felt like a doorway I had never been allowed to see suddenly open just for me. The apprenticeship was in another state, far from the tight hold I had lived under for years. For the first time, I felt a spark of something I had almost forgotten, possibility. I waited until dinner to bring it up. My voice shook a little, but I managed to say I'd been offered the position and wanted to take it. For a second, there was silence. Then Rexha's fork hit the table, and Klain leaned back like I had just suggested something outrageous. They didn't ask questions. They didn't congratulate me. They went straight into criticism. They called it reckless. They said I wasn't prepared. They painted the move as some dangerous leap only someone without judgment would attempt. They didn't stop there. Klain made a point of reminding me how easily overwhelmed I was. Rexha added that living on my own would be a disaster because I wasn't steady enough to handle life outside their guidance. Their voices blended until it felt like a wall pushing me down. But something in me finally rose. I spoke softly, but the words felt heavier than anything I'd ever said to them. "No. I'm still going." The room changed instantly. The air tightened. Their faces hardened in a way I had never seen. It wasn't worry. It was something sharper, something that told me they weren't afraid for me, they were afraid of losing control. In that moment, I knew things would never return to the way they were. And I knew I couldn't take it back. The moment I told them I wasn't backing down, something shifted in the room. Rice's expression didn't explode the way I expected. Instead, everything in her face drained away, leaving this cold, flat look that made my skin crawl. Klain didn't argue or raise his voice. He just gave a low, bitter comment under his breath, like he wanted it to sting without looking directly at me. That's exactly what Jord would have done. My chest tightened. Hearing my father's name in that tone always sent a jolt through me, but before I could even react, Risa stepped in with something sharper. She didn't yell. She didn't even blink. She just delivered the words like a blade meant for the softest part of me. You're just like your father, selfish, unpredictable, and impossible to handle. I felt the floor tilt under me. They knew what that comparison did to me. They knew how hard I had tried my whole life to avoid even the smallest resemblance to the man they painted as a walking disaster. They knew, and still they used it like a weapon. My throat tightened so much I couldn't speak. It wasn't just the insult, it was the certainty behind it. Like they had been waiting for a moment to throw it at me, and my decision finally gave them the excuse. Klain avoided my eyes, almost as if he thought saying it quietly made it less cruel. But Risa didn't look away. She stared right at me, almost daring me to break. I could feel my heartbeat pounding, my hands shaking, and every terrible memory they had ever connected to Jord suddenly crashing over me. In that moment, I realized they weren't reacting out of fear or concern. They were striking where they knew I was weakest. And they hit with full intention. I was shaking so hard after hearing those words that all I could do was stand there and let memories I'd tried to bury force their way back. They'd spent years shaping my mind, telling me Jord walked away because he couldn't handle responsibility, because he was unpredictable, because he didn't care enough to stay. I believed them because I was sick and scared, and they were the adults who claimed to protect me. But as I grew older, pieces of the past slipped through the cracks. Quiet comments from relatives, strange pauses during family gatherings, and whispers I wasn't meant to hear painted a different picture. Jord wasn't perfect. He struggled with his temper and didn't always manage it well. I remembered loud voices and a smashed lamp. I remembered him crying afterward, kneeling to apologize to me. Those moments stayed with me, even though Risa pretended they didn't happen. What no one explained back then was the reason everything exploded. I later learned that the final argument wasn't just another fight. It started when Jord discovered Risa had been seeing Klain behind his back. That betrayal cut him deeper than any anger he'd shown before. He didn't storm out because he wanted freedom. He left because the home he loved had already been torn apart, and he was painted as the villain to cover their choices. I never forgot the day he walked out the door. He looked broken, not furious. I didn't understand it as a child, but as I got older, I started to piece together that he hadn't abandoned me. He'd been pushed aside, step by step, until he couldn't stay. The story they fed me growing up wasn't the full truth. It was the version that made them look blameless. I tried to steady myself after that night, but their reaction only grew harsher when they realized I wasn't backing down. I kept sorting my things, quietly planning my move, hoping a little space would calm the tension. Instead, everything twisted tighter. One morning, I tried checking my balance so I could prepare for the trip, and the login wouldn't work. After a long moment of confusion, Risa appeared in the doorway and said she had secured the account. She claimed it was to protect me from making rash choices. Hearing that made my stomach drop. It wasn't protection. It was a lock. Before I could process that, Klain stepped in with another blow. He told me he would stop covering my school payments if I insisted on running off. He said it in a flat tone, like he was discussing the weather, not threatening my future. It was clear they were trying to box me in from every direction, cutting off options one by one. Then the calls from extended family started. A cousin reached out, confused and concerned, saying they'd heard I was acting unstable, that I was making wild decisions and refusing help. I could almost hear Rice's voice behind every word. They were painting me as someone falling apart, just to make sure no one would support my choice. Standing there with my phone in my hand, listening to someone repeat a story that didn't feel like mine, something inside me finally snapped into place. For years, I'd convinced myself their tight hold came from care, that the constant guidance and interference was love. But in that moment, everything became painfully clear. It wasn't love. It was control wrapped in soft excuses. And I needed to get out. I felt cornered in my own home, and I knew I needed someone outside their reach. The only person who came to mind was Keel, my father's sister. I had seen her only a handful of times growing up, always at a distance, as if she wasn't meant to be part of my world. Reaching out felt strange, but I dialed her number anyway. When she answered, her voice carried a softness I hadn't felt in years. I explained everything in careful pieces, unsure how much to share. She listened without interrupting, then asked me to come see her. I drove over shaking, unsure what I expected. Keel greeted me with a long, searching look, like she had been waiting for this moment. Once we sat down, she went quiet for a moment, then got up and returned with a small box. She placed it in front of me and said my father had written me messages for years. I froze. She explained that he sent them regularly, hoping I'd get them someday. My eyes burned as I opened the box. Dozens of envelopes with my name written in his handwriting lay inside. Keel told me he'd tried staying involved but kept hitting walls he didn't understand. When he passed the messages to her, he still believed they'd reach me. Knowing they had been hidden all this time hit me harder than anything Risa or Klein had said. It felt like a stolen connection, a piece of my life kept from me. But the pain also lit something solid inside me. Keel saw it and immediately moved to help. She guided me through gathering papers I needed, helped me set up my own financial access, and laid out practical steps for leaving without tipping anyone off. For the first time, I felt a quiet, steady certainty. I wasn't alone, and I had a way out. The morning I chose to walk out, my heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I moved quietly, grabbing the bags I had packed the night before. I hoped I could make it to the door without drawing attention, but the moment I stepped into the hallway, Risa appeared like she had been listening for any sign of movement. Her eyes dropped to the luggage, and her face twisted in a way that made the whole house feel smaller. Before I could reach the exit, she rushed ahead and planted herself in front of it. Her voice rose instantly, shaking the walls as she accused me of ruining everything I'd worked for, claiming I was throwing away my life out of stubborn pride. She flung every fear she could think of at me, hoping one would stick and make me freeze. But I didn't. Something inside me had shifted too far to turn back. I kept my voice steady. If wanting my own path makes me like him, I said softly, then maybe he wasn't the villain you made him out to be. The silence after those words was sharper than her shouting. Klein stepped in then, trying a different tactic. He softened his tone, acting wounded, telling me I was being ungrateful, insisting I was letting emotions cloud my judgment. When that didn't work, he switched to warnings, about money, school, safety, anything that might unsettle me enough to stay. I held the door handle and breathed in slowly, letting their words wash over me without pulling me back. Every attempt to sway me felt like another reminder of why I needed to go. Without raising my voice, without apologizing, I opened the door. Their shouting followed me down the walkway, but I didn't look back. I kept walking. The first night at Keel's house, I collapsed on the couch and felt something I hadn't in years, relief. The air didn't feel heavy with control or judgment. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe without calculating every word, every move. The walls weren't watching me, and I wasn't tiptoeing around anyone's expectations. The apprenticeship began the next week. The work was challenging, demanding, but it filled me with a sense of purpose I hadn't realized I was missing. I learned quickly that I was capable, steady, and resilient. The nervous tension I had carried for years wasn't a reflection of me, it was the weight of being confined. One evening, I finally opened the box of letters Keel had given me. Each envelope carried a part of my father I had never known. His words were raw, full of regret, but also overflowing with love and pride. He had followed my life quietly, celebrating small victories and mourning from afar when I struggled. I could feel him beside me as I read, a presence I had been denied. Tears came easily as I pieced together the man he truly was, not the monster Rexha had painted, but someone who had loved me fiercely, even from a distance. There was grief too. Keel gently told me Jord had passed away 2 years earlier, and I felt the sharp sting of loss I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Even in that sorrow, I felt a shift inside me. For the first time I understood that the trembling, the fear, the doubts, they hadn't belonged to me. I had been trapped, but now I was free. Every word of his letters, every gentle memory, reminded me that I could finally build a life that was truly mine. After weeks of settling into my new routine, I decided it was time to confront Rexha and Klein in the only way I could without stepping back into their world. I sat at Keel's kitchen table with a notebook and began writing. I laid out everything I had learned, the secret affair, the letters my father had sent and they hid, the ways they manipulated my life under the guise of care. I wrote carefully, letting the words carry the weight of truth without anger, letting the clarity of the facts speak louder than shouting ever could. I explained that I would no longer respond to their calls or messages. I made it clear that the only way we could reconnect was if they admitted what they had done, stopped twisting the story about Jord, and took responsibility for the control they had exerted for years. I folded the letter, took a deep breath, and sent it. Almost immediately, the replies started. Rage came first. The messages screamed disbelief, accusations, and attempts to twist the situation back onto me. Denial followed, with claims that I had misunderstood everything and that I was being cruel. Finally, desperate pleas arrived, begging me to talk, promising changes they never intended to make. I read them all once, then set my phone aside. I didn't respond. Each message reminded me why I had left and why I had taken this step. I wasn't seeking vengeance in the way they might expect. My letter wasn't meant to punish, they had already done enough to themselves. It was meant to set boundaries, to claim the space and respect I had been denied for so long. I let silence replace their noise, and in that quiet, I felt the power of finally taking control of my own life. I started by taking practical steps that made it impossible for them to reach me the way they used to. I went to the bank and set up accounts in my name alone, making sure no one else could access them. Every card, every statement, every detail was under my control now. Then I contacted my school and updated all my records so that only I could manage enrollment, grades, and financial information. I changed my phone number and email addresses, cutting the invisible threads they had used to monitor every aspect of my life. With each small action, a weight lifted, and I could feel the tight grip they had maintained for years beginning to slip away. It wasn't flashy. There were no dramatic confrontations, no shouting matches, no public declarations. Instead, I felt a steady, growing sense of relief. The freedom I had longed for wasn't about proving them wrong or humiliating them, it was about reclaiming myself. Every message I ignored, every blocked call, every closed door in their direction reinforced that they no longer had the power to dictate my choices. For the first time, I realized my revenge didn't need to be loud to be effective. The control they had thrived on was gone, and I could finally breathe without fear. Each decision I made, every step I took on my own, became a quiet declaration: I belonged to myself, and no one could take that away. By the time I settled into my new rhythm, I felt lighter than I had in years. Their influence had evaporated, replaced by a calm, enduring freedom that no lecture, threat, or comparison could touch. It was mine, and it was enough. I held the envelope in my hands longer than I should have, feeling its weight settle against my palms. The workshop smelled of metal and oil, a place where I had finally carved out a space that belonged entirely to me. Slowly, I unfolded the paper and began to read. Each word carried him back to me, his voice soft and steady across the years, reaching through the silence he had left behind. I held the envelope in my hands longer than I should have, feeling its weight settle against my palms. The workshop smelled of metal and oil, a place where I had finally carved out a space that belonged entirely to me. Slowly, I unfolded the paper and began to read. Each word carried him back to me, his voice soft and steady across the years, reaching through the silence he had left behind. He wrote about believing in me even when no one else did, about watching from afar and hoping I would find my own path. He admitted regrets, small confessions of fear and longing, but every line carried love stronger than any argument, any lecture, or any comparison I had endured. The words cut through the lingering shadow of doubt, replacing it with something I hadn't felt before, certainty. One passage caught me completely. I hope one day you'll know you're nothing like the monster they claimed. You're stronger than all of us. My chest tightened as I read it again. I could feel the years of tension, fear, and judgment sliding away, leaving space for something I had been denied for far too long, truth. I pressed the letter to my chest, letting a few tears slip freely, and for the first time in forever, I smiled without guilt or hesitation. The weight of comparisons, the shadow of his name twisted into blame, dissolved entirely. Standing there, surrounded by the hum of machines and the scent of new beginnings, I finally understood. The narrative they forced upon me no longer had power. What had once been my prison had transformed into a reminder of strength. I was free, whole, and finally at peace. Hey besties! Thanks so much for sticking with me through this story. Imagine living under constant control, being told your life isn't yours, and hearing cruel comparisons meant to break you. That's what Lane endured, but she found a way out, uncovered the truth about her father, and finally claimed her freedom. Her strength turned betrayal into power. If this touched you, like,